Hello for watching the Development Sector Series, which is Dev Sector Series Special. We're going to be talking about the advocacy before, during, and after the elections of civil society organizations all across the country. Now, let's take notes. The ones that I'm going to mention are the ones that I could find, the research that I could find, visual research, audio, and different other elements that I could find on the web and different other references. So if you as a civil society organization have been doing a lot of advocacy work, voter education, election observation, and all that great work that citizens are supposed to do to enhance our democracy, please make sure you put it in the comments. So if you have any outer links and what have you, just put it in the comments so that we can do some more knowledge sharing in this piece of content that I'm sharing with you. Now, before the elections, because I'm a consultant in the development sector, I watched a lot of my colleagues conduct a lot of advocacy, voter education, talking, from women, youth, and persons with disabilities with regards to security incidences and just lessons learned from the past national and gubernatorial elections. Now, during this election, I was actually in the hospital doing the compilation of the results. Luckily, I was able to vote. That was a relief. But over 24 hours after, I had to take myself to the hospital. And guess what? I had to be admitted. So I was watching on my phone and in the hospital television the compilation of results by INEC. So I couldn't stop watching. I had to just keep watching that information on the feedback by INEC, the feedback by the political parties when they saw and felt that there was electoral malpractice and malfeasances and security challenges going on. They actually issued a press conference, and so many issues were happening while I was in my hotel room, reeling in pain and trying to really process what was wrong with me at the time. Luckily, I'm much better, so don't worry about me. And thanks for your love and support. So now I am going to be covering what some civil society organizations have been able to do during that process. So just talking about some of the conversations they're having, letting us know as citizens that we need to manage our expectations. I don't think people saw that. Maybe on national television, sometimes people don't watch that kind of stuff. Most people watch on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and different other social media platforms, especially Twitter. So just trying to consolidate all this information together just gives you a sense of what citizens through institutional civil society organizations, what they've been able to do to provide citizen awareness, citizen engagement, and GOTV campaigns for people to get out and vote, and the feedback after the election and how far we've come. So enjoy as I share some of this information with you. Any questions, any comments, please put in the comment section. Like I said, if your organization is doing some great work, did some great work with regards to the elections, please put it in the comment section because this is not the end all and be all. This is a knowledge sharing platform. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you like what you're watching, please like and share this information so that it informs the algorithm of all the social media platforms that I'm sharing this on, that this should be shared with more people. All right, happy viewing. So before we get started, I'm just going to say a little bit about myself. My name is Efwa Ede. I am the CEO of Social Impact Consulting. We're a development consultancy firm that looks to maximize social impact. To get more information about our content and what we do with regards in training, advisory, coaching of civil society organizations all across the continent, please visit us at www.socialimpactng.com. I'll see you there. So let's talk about the security issues. one of the civil society organization leaders that I'm going to be talking to you about is Idayat Hassan, who is the executive director of Center for Democracy and Development, West Africa. She talks about some of the security issues that are going on in the Northeast, the Northwest, and even Southeast, South, and all over the country. So, how is INEC going to deal with some of the security issues? How are some of the security agencies going to make sure that it is safe for citizens to vote? Listen up.
I think it's important to point out that yes, while Nigeria has actually battled insecurity, what we are facing currently, which I continue to call an epidemic of insecurity, is unprecedented in all of the country's four republics. And in this instance, you are talking about raging conflict in the southeast of the country. By that, we mean the separationist agitation, which of course has taken different forms with different groups, three different groups emerging out of the indigenous people of Biafra. At a point, they have actually affected the elections right from the voters' registration exercise, where instead of working for 5 days in a week, INEC had to work for 4 days in a week. You will find that out of all the attacks on INEC infrastructure, the highest number, 11, representing like 20%, has been just from Imo State, as well as what the non-state actors like Ebubiagu and Co are also doing in that region. And that is just a microsome of the southeast. In the same vein, you go to the south of the country. While we think that the militancy has actually helped a bit, there has been a rise of cultism in that area, and you will even see nothing brings home how dangerous it is more than the abduction of over 30 people in the train in Edo State just few days ago. That is South that looks actually better and more progressive. You go to the Northwest, you have more than 100 bandit groups operating in that region, with each having a minimum of like 30 members in the group, minus the activities of the insurgents, the jihadists that have moved away from the northeast into the northwest of the country in such a way that you have the Ansaru, you have the Islamic State in the West African province, ISWAP, and the Boko Haram elements now operating in the northwest of the country up to the north central, part of the north central, such as Niger, and even moving into Kwara. And we still have the insurgency, which of course is become more latent. It's not as potent as it used to be in the northeast of the country. This is minus farmers and herders conflict, and political violence itself seems to have actually been at one of the highest, with our Nigerian election tracker done in partnership with ACLED just by the end of December, recording more than 120 just of cultist attacks. That is minus other forms of attacks that you might actually be thinking of. And it is within this framework that INEC will actually be conducting elections. So you have the challenges of prevailing insecurity, which far outweighs what we experienced in the 2015 elections, when we said that Boko Haram had taken over just about the size of Belgium in the northeastern part of the country. Everywhere you look, there are challenges. These are serious implications for the ability of voters to access the polls.
So, I conducted a Dev Sector Series interview with Samson Itodo. You can look up the Dev Sector Series episode on my YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/social impact consulting, if you want to watch the full episode. But I just did a partial snippet of the conversation we had on INEC's independence in the process. So these were the concerns that he was raising, that is INEC really independent of the ruling party? So this is some of the conversations we had. Listen up.
If you've got weak accountability institutions, you cannot advance democracy. Weak electoral commissions that are not independent, that are subservient and are vulnerable, to intimidation by incumbents, you're not going to have credible elections. And that's what we saw, even in Nigerian elections. where the executive, didn't release or delayed the funding of the Electoral Commission in the 2019 elections. Now, that's one way to rig the elections, because elections themselves are they're capital intensive, but they're also a human activity that requires a lot of sensitivity, due diligence in managing the complexity of logistics management. And so if you have a large country like Nigeria, you need a robust logistics management plan, to deliver on elections. And if you don't provide the monies for the Electoral Commission, for God's sake, where are they going to get the monies to do what? To procure ballot papers and result sheets and pay the personnel that is required for elections. And so incumbents, use the force, use the power that they have to undermine the Electoral Commission and make them incapable of conducting, credible elections. And tied to that is the question about the assault on the independence of electoral commissions across Africa, where appointments are either delayed or politicians appoint their cronies, into electoral commissions because they want them to do their bidding. So that itself, places electoral commissions at a very disadvantaged point, and it weakens their ability to conduct credible elections.
With regards to the political parties and candidate selection, Samson Itodo talked about some of the issues that happen in the political parties where the most credible, the most knowledgeable candidates that can serve our country do not even have a chance in the primaries because of financial gains, godfatherism, and different other issues that happen in these political parties, so that the options that citizens have to even vote for may not even work because you're saying, okay, we're going to pick between the devil and the deep blue sea. Listen up.
And my sense is, therefore, choice is compromised. Now, the choice of voters is compromised ab initio when political parties don't field competent candidates. And so if you look at the process for selecting candidates, one is the delegates, the primaries, the conventions. How are delegates selected? How transparent is that process? Who is in the room when delegates are selected? And you can see it's about the highest bidder and the highest spender. You come to the primaries. Do the parties take time to screen the leadership credentials of candidates before they field them? Or you just have hegemons within the parties who determine who becomes a candidate of a party? And that has been the source of this avalanche of pre-election cases that pervades our electoral process, with lots of pre-election cases challenging, the credibility of primaries, or also challenging the qualification, the eligibility of candidates presented by parties. So the parties are complicit in this when they don't, first define the values, the leadership values, that defines candidate selection process. I've not seen any party that has engaged in this serious discussion around leadership. To say, what's the kind of leadership that we need? What's the kind of leadership are we going to provide? But it's just been about, former military dictators, former governors, former this and former that. It's about the former. And the argument is you need people who are experienced. And my question is, the fact that someone is a former governor does not mean he's got, the leadership capital to provide excellent, transformative, innovative, and accountable leadership. No, it's not guaranteed. So I don't buy the experience argument. I think parties need to look broadly and define the ethics, the values that would shape the leadership selection process. And it shouldn't be about the amount of money that someone has in their bank account or their loyalty to certain individuals within the parties. It's just sad that what the parties have done is to reward loyalty and sycophancy with a seat in the National Assembly or with a seat in the State House of Assembly. No society makes progress when political parties are not presenting high quality candidates to run for office. And so voters are left with no choice. Perhaps it's also one of the reasons why people don't also vote, because at the end of the day, they're only voting for people who have recycled themselves in office, people who have been ruling us since 1980 something.
As we're having that conversation in the development sector series, because we're talking about credible elections in Nigeria, which was a topic that was reigning at the time. So he talked about political parties and candidate selection. Now, for us to have credible leaders in Nigeria, the political party primaries have to be just. We are going to be talking about the advocacy of the Electoral Act, okay? So, civil society organizations worked really diligently, along with INEC and the INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, on the Electoral Act. I mean, the Electoral Act was supposed to cover up some of those rigging strategies so that there is a free, fair, and credible election. So, civil society organizations that serve marginalized groups, youth, women, persons with disabilities, came out en masse to advocate for the Electoral Act. So, one thing that the politicians were fighting against is for electronic transmission, but citizens fought back and civil society organizations led the charge in that effort. Okay, so that happened that the Electoral Act passed in 2022 so that we are able to have a free, fair, and credible election. Listen up.
Understanding the electoral law and our constitution, I think, is very important. Currently, the National Assembly is attempting to pass a legislation that prohibits INEC from deploying technology from collation of results. They want to ban electronic transmission of results. And the reason why they want to do that is they want to rig the 2023 elections, because they will write results and then force polling officials to declare the results, and there's nothing there to serve as a check. But if they transmit the results electronically, it will serve as a check on the manual process. So we should support electronic voting. Speak out and engage the electoral reform process. Call your legislators, because if they're going to rig these elections, they will start by compromising and inserting certain laws into the Electoral Act. So it legitimizes, their corrupt practices. And we must stop them, because that's the role that we have to play as citizens. And for me, the IGA Africa and other partners that we've been working with, we are going to try as much as possible to stop, these politicians who don't have our interest at heart.
We have had to acknowledge that we have moved from one stage since 1999 to a stage now where we can now begin to see how technology can help us play well in the political space, particularly with elections. But there's still so much that we need to do with the Electoral Act. We could just be asking for more within a short space. We want to move very fast because we have that democracies we are comparing ourselves with. We want to look at the institutional framework expanded, strengthened, such that we can have better electoral management, particularly in the process of voting, collation of the votes, announcement of the votes, and then we enter the judicial process of review and all those things that will happen around all of it.
Another thing that Samson Itodo talked about as well is some of his concerns with INEC. So let's hear it.
Weak electoral commissions that are not independent, that are subservient and are vulnerable, to intimidation by incumbents, you're not going to have credible elections. And that's what we saw, even in Nigerian elections, where the executive, didn't release or delayed the funding of the Electoral Commission in the 2019 elections. Now, that's one way to rig the elections, because elections themselves are they're capital intensive, but they're also a human activity that requires a lot of sensitivity, due diligence in managing the complexity of logistics management. And so if you have a large country like Nigeria, You need a robust logistics management plan, to deliver on elections. And if you don't provide the monies for the electoral commission, for God's sake, where are they going to get the monies to do what? To procure ballot papers and result sheets and pay the personnel that is required for elections. And so incumbents, use the force, use the power that they have to undermine the electoral commission and make them incapable of conducting, credible elections. And tied to that is the question about the assault on the independence of electoral commissions across Africa, where appointments are either delayed or politicians appoint their cronies, into electoral commissions because they want them to do their bidding. So that itself, places electoral commissions at a very disadvantaged point, and it weakens their ability to conduct credible elections.
Another issue with regards to managing the expectations with regard to INEC. I know sometimes we say, oh, we have the Electoral Act, so now we should just fold our arms and know that we're going to have a credible election. But Idayat Hassan told us to manage our expectations in the process. Listen up.
But while technology is a positive, is not a silver bullet. So managing expectations also becomes very, very important and relevant. While it worked perfectly well in these two off-cycle elections, you have to understand that it represents just like 3.5%. Max just put it approximately like 4% of the total number of polling units and local government. We will actually be having elections during the general elections. So it raises the question that if this technology must work perfectly, the training of the staff that will be utilizing it must be top-notch. The numbers that must also be available must be more than what it's currently. So let's say currently we have like 14,000 extra. That should at least be increased by 2 because we have seen it. If you look at Kenyan elections, they had the KIMS kit, which is a direct replica of our beavers. And for every word, we were made to understand, or we saw that there were at least 6 extra in this area. So we need more of the beavers. We also need the ability to have trained people properly so that they can properly utilize these beavers, because this is the first time it is being utilized on a national scale and at such numbers that we have not seen previously. So there are really issues, but it is a positive because with the beavers and the IRIF, everybody wants to participate in the elections, but much work needs to be done before the election day itself.
So now we're going to be talking about voter education, okay? So at this point, the Electoral Act has been passed. There's continuous voter registration, but there were some hitches with regards to continuous voter registration. I can tell you by my own personal experience that I went to INEC up to 6 times to register to vote. Then to pick up my PVC, that was another battle. I think I went there like 3 times. So it was not an easy process for citizens to register to vote and to pick up our PVC. So one thing that civil society organizations like Yaga Africa did to try to get more youth to come and register to vote en masse was these EU-sponsored concerts in Abuja and Lagos. Let's see some of the pictures. As you can see, A lot of youth came out en masse. A lot of celebrities participated in this process to encourage people to register and vote. So that was quite a process that civil society organizations led the charge. Why did they lead the charge this much? Because they advocated for the Electoral Act, and that was a bill of assurance to the young people that this time is not going to be business as usual. It will be free, fair, and credible elections. So that was the guarantee that Yaga Africa and many other civil society organizations all over the country, that was what they did. They assured citizens that, look, the Electoral Act has been passed. Before they go read this election, they go hard them. So that was the guarantee that many organizations gave, organizations serving marginalized groups, women in marginalized communities, in the villages, and the nooks and crannies of this country. Organizations were helping to register, helping with voter registration. That was what was happening. That was what increased civic engagement in Nigeria. Okay, so I'm going to share some videos.
With our permanent voters card and with INEC's new 2022 Electoral Act signed by Mr. President, what this means is power has now been taken to the grassroots with electronic transmission of results. So today, we're mobilizing, we're sensitizing and educating people and organizing better to say that with our permanent voters card, we will not only change the course of Nigeria, but the history. A lot of young people at home, because of the crisis between our federal government and ASU, and we want to use this opportunity to say that the future of Nigeria is in our hands. And we are going to do door-to-door, house-to-house campaign to get people to collect their permanent voters card. But most importantly, on election day, they come out and cast their ballots to decide their future and the future of this great country. That if politicians that are corrupt come and try to induce you by providing you with rice, beans, wrappers, salt, you reject them.
So at this point, there was a lot of voter education, voter registration. Now it was PVC pickup. So the voter registration closed, okay, so that INEC could process all the backlog of registration paperwork and get people's PVCs ready. So now civil society organizations went around to now encourage citizens to pick up their PVCs, which is rightfully so. You can't have a large number of people register to vote and then a small number of people pick up their PVCs, which some of which is what happened. Now, let me tell you, like I said to you before, I went to INEC like 3 to 4 times. There was even a time I had to wear the same outfit twice so I can look at the INEC person and say, Auntie, is me, oh, I want to pick up my PVC. So these were the issues that we're facing as citizens, but civil society organizations encouraged us. Some of them were on social media, some of them were on television, radio, print, encouraging people to pick up their PVCs. And I'm sure as citizens, tell me in the comments if you saw any message, public service announcement on the radio by civil society organizations to encourage people to register to vote or encourage people to pick up their PVCs. Please put it in the comments if you saw any of that. So that happened because they had a guarantee that, listen, the Electoral Act passed. The president signed it in 2022. Don't you worry about anything. You are going to vote and your vote is going to count. So that was the guarantee that civil society organizations also, we did our part. Civil society organizations did their part to make sure we had a free, fair, and credible election, speaking on behalf of citizens. So as you know, there was a lot of conversations happening as PVCs were being picked up. After a while, they were extending the deadline for the picking up of PVCs because PVCs weren't ready. It was really, really frustrating because I went to the general INEC area in my region, in my local government. Went there, my PVC wasn't ready. So they said it would be right in my ward, in my ward area, that I can go and pick up my PVC. I went to go pick up my PVC. It still was not ready. So they had to keep extending the deadline so that more and more people could pick up their PVC. And then you started seeing stuff on social media that PVCs were thrown in the garbage, were thrown in different parts of the country. So these were issues that INEC had to combat in the process. And you have to understand that INEC is a big agency. They have to get people to vote all over the country, in all over 700 local governments in the country. And each local government has several wards. So you have to understand the magnitude of logistical framework that INEC has to handle, and the amount of staff strength that is needed for this. So when you look at some of those kinds of issues, you would have some corruption going on here, and then they had to manage all of that. So that was huge for them. So these were conversations that are being had between PVC pickups, and then you had politicians having conversations with citizens, Labour Party, PDP, APC, SDP, and different other political parties were having conversations with citizens on what they were on their campaign promises, and rallies were going on, rallies were happening. And because of the Electoral Act, there were various timelines that were there. So candidates could campaign, then they could stop campaigning, and then it was time for citizens to vote. Okay? So now it's February 25th, okay? And the elections are happening, and people are having conversations and feedback on how the election went and how the election is going. Listen up.
The Situation Room observed that there were delayed deployments of election officials and materials across the country, leading to late commencement of accreditation and voting in more than 70% of the polling units visited. In Abia, Anambra, Bayelsa, Ebonyi, Kaduna, Enugu, Imo, Rivers, and Kaduna states, as well as the Federal Capital Territory, there were significant delays in the commencement of polls, with several polling units opening as late as 11 a.m. In 13 states, some of the polling units did not open officially until the almost closing of the polls at 2:30 p.m. Delays in opening the polls created a corresponding problems of late closing of the polls in many places. Situation Room observers reported that at least 35% of the polling units visited, closed by 2:30 p.m. The opening and closing of the polls were subjected, it subjected the voters, many of whom arrived the polling units very early in the morning, subjected them to very unpleasant experience in terms of the voting process.
IAGA Africa established a critical incident desk as part of its national data center to receive urgent messages from its observers. Over the course of the Saturday, 25 February 2023 election day, IAGA Africa confirmed 135 critical incidents witnessed by the Watching the Vote citizens observers. The most frequent incident report recorded by Watching the Vote observers related to polling units not opening. There were 18 reports on that. Malfunctioning of beavers, there were 9 reports on that. Ballot box snatching, there were 8 reports on that. Insufficient elections materials, there were 3 reports. And the disruption of the voting process, there were 5 reports on those critical incidents.
She's the Executive Director of Enough is Enough Nigeria. What are your thoughts about how this election played out?
Certainly not what we expected. INEC over the last 1 year has talked a lot about how technology will play a role. not only in terms of transparency, but also engagement with citizens, so you can actually see how results are uploaded. Not only have they not done that, but they've just not communicated. Now, technology can have challenges, granted, but you owe it to Nigerians to explain what the challenges are and what you're doing to mitigate them.
The bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, and the electronic transmission of the results to the National Collation Center, there was a big update on this as something to bring more transparency to the election, but both appear to have failed spectacularly.
Indeed, for the accreditation of it, I think it worked quite well. I think Yaga's report said probably in 80-something% of cases it worked, but the point is where it now had to do with results. So collation agents had problems uploading it to the portal. Even if you did it online, it wasn't uploading, the system was shut down for a while. And the key thing is INEC did not communicate. You had said that that was going to be an important part of the process. Yes, the law does allow manual collation, which is what they did. But what we then found out was there were several occasions where results were altered. But the commission literally said nothing. And that's people are then worried. You promised us a transparent process. You promised us we could follow in real time was what the words the chairman kept using. But that didn't happen. And we still don't know why. And the commission should be held accountable.
Yemi, just to be clear, somebody might say, you're saying the same thing the opposition has been saying, the Labour Party, the PDP. Is enough affiliated with any political party?
No, we're not. We're a non-partisan organization, but the truth is the truth. For the political parties, it's about their votes. For us, it's about, as Nigerians, we expected a transparent process. We have no skin in the game, but the skin that we have in the game is ensuring that after 5 cycles of elections, we should be able to deliver elections that Nigerians feel represent their votes. Nigerians do not feel, well, maybe except for those who won, do not feel that these elections represent their desires, nor what actually happened on Saturday.
IEGA, this big observation group, says that this was a missed opportunity in terms of what Nigerians' expectations were. Do you agree?
Certainly, I do. Because there was a lot of hope. We had NSAS in 2020. A lot of young people saw it as an opportunity to actually engage in the process. Obviously, people had different candidates at different levels. But what was exciting for them was that this was a promised process that was transparent. The chairman repeated it over and over again. Electronic transmission is part of the process. You will see it in real time. So there was that. So beyond also what political parties tried to do at the polling units, there were incidents of violence, scattering polling booths. INEC, beyond the electronic part, created new polling units that a lot of people didn't know where they were going. So that disenfranchised people. The process of using your permanent voters cards was also a challenge. So there were multiple failure points along the way. But by Saturday, people were like, you know what, we're here, we're going to vote. Then you vote and you don't feel that your vote counts. For a young democracy trying to get its predominantly young population engaged, this is a failure in a sense.
Yemi, thank you so much. Yemi Adamalekun.
So now we have the Election Petition Tribunal. It's been said by INEC that the winner of the election is APC presidential candidate Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who is now the president-elect as of this video. So Yaga Africa Samson Itodo talks about the Election Petition Tribunal. What if you have a problem with the results of the election? What do you do? Here we go.
Welcome to Elections 101 in 5, a show brought to you by Yaga Africa and supported by the UNDP. My name is Samson Itodo. What are the stages of appeal against a judgment delivered by an election petition tribunal or a court? Litigants, or anyone who is a party to an election petition, who is dissatisfied with the ruling or the judgment delivered by a tribunal, an election tribunal to be specific, or courts of first instance, can appeal such judgment as a matter of constitutional right. In other words, the right of appeal exists only when it is prescribed in the Constitution. So if you're not satisfied with the outcome, with the judgment issued by a court, you have a right to appeal that judgment. Once a tribunal or court delivers a judgment on an election petition, a petitioner, that's the person who institutes, the person who files the case challenging an election, or the respondent, and that's the person who the petition is made against, can appeal against such decision in a higher court to obtain justice. That is the beauty of democracy. It is important to note that the exercise of the right of appeal must be in strict compliance with provisions of the law as well as the rules of election appeals. So this is important because to obtain justice in an election petition, the court has, as well as the Constitution, has provided you with the right of appeal. So now let's look at the stages of appeal on judgments in an election petition. So appeals arising from the decision of a court of appeal in respect of a presidential election shall be heard by the Supreme Court. In other words, if a candidate or a party is dissatisfied with the ruling of a court of appeal, which is the tribunal for presidential election, they have a right to appeal to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is the highest court of the land, and so it is called the court of last resort for matters relating to presidential elections. It takes approximately 8 months to determine a presidential election petition. Now, for governorship election petition, when the court at the tribunal, at the governorship election tribunal, issues a judgment and the parties are dissatisfied, they can appeal to the court of appeal, and then from the court of appeal, if they are dissatisfied also with the decision of the court of appeal, they can appeal to the Supreme Court. So for governorship elections, the final court is the Supreme Court, but there are 2 stages. The first stage is from the tribunal, it goes to the court of appeal, and from the court of appeal to the Supreme Court. For governorship election petitions, it takes 10 months, an approximate 10 months to resolve a governorship election petition. And lastly, appeals on judgments issued by a National Assembly and State Assembly election tribunal, those appeals shall be filed at the Court of Appeal. So the Court of Appeal is the final court for all appeals related to petitions on National Assembly and State Assembly elections. And for these set of cases, it takes approximately 8 months to resolve a dispute on a National Assembly and State Assembly elections. And that's Elections 101 in 5. Now you know the different stages of appeals in cases related to election petitions. For presidential, the final court is the Supreme Court. For governorship, the final court is the Supreme Court. And for state assembly and National Assembly elections petitions, the final court is the Court of Appeal. Bye for now.
So this is Yaga Africa, which is a civil society organization in partnership with UNDP and on the platform of Channels Television, to talk about if you have an issue with the election, what do you do? Next, I'm going to talk to you about one of our, how would I say it, the executive director of the foremost civil society organizations that fought for democracy, which is Clement Wankwo. He's the executive director of the Policy Legal Advocacy Center. He also talks about the judiciary in terms of what to expect from them during the tribunal, whether or not they're going to judge fairly, how his projections on how things are going to go. And so let's listen up.
Well, I think what is clear is that the judiciary is guaranteed independence in the Constitution. Some of the shenanigans you see with the courts and their decisions may not necessarily even be coming from overbearing pressure of the executive. Some of it perhaps is related to the individual whims and caprices of judges, some of whom may have compromised to politicians. We know that the leadership of the judiciary has been speaking publicly about the need for judges to be non-partisan, to be professional. We hope that this permeates the entire hierarchy of the judicial system, and that the judges see themselves as independent arbiters in the electoral process. But I must say that I do not get a sense that there is some strategy of the executive to muzzle the judiciary into some decision. I think most of it comes from the individual tendencies of judges, and our hope is that with continued emphasis on discipline of judges, continued emphasis on training, that these judges understand the need to be professional and non-partisan.
So there are many more civil society organizations who have done great work on getting citizens excited about civic engagement and participation in the elections. Due to the NSAS movement, the youth saw this election as another place of hope to get Nigeria back to where it needs to be, which is of the people, by the people, for the people. So this was a beacon of hope for the youth in Nigeria. So many organizations went into the nooks and crannies of villages and towns, working with INEC to register people to vote. So the excitement seems to have waned because of the outcome of the election. So, because the civil society organizations, we put ourselves out there saying, hey, we can guarantee you almost a free, fair, and credible election because of the Electoral Act. But do you think INEC did the right thing? And do you think the civil society organizations responded the way they needed to respond to what INEC did? Do you think we could have been a bit more assertive in terms of what they expected from INEC, and INEC fulfilling what it said it would do in the Electoral Act, obeying the law that governs the entire agency? Do we think they did that? Because civil society organizations had their skin in the game, because they drove citizens to go and register and vote. They encouraged citizens to pick up their PVC, and they encouraged citizens to get out and vote. So now, what's the next steps for civil society organizations? What's the next step for INEC? Let me give my own opinion. INEC has taken all the work we've done and taken it back into the Stone Ages. Some people may disagree because of the Electoral Act, but if you can disobey your own law, what next? How do we hold them accountable so that some of this doesn't happen anymore? So our prayer is that the new administration works with civil society organizations to reform INEC, to address some of the major irregularities in the elections, and make sure that various sectors in the Nigerian economy obey the laws of the land, so that we have a thriving democracy and an open civic space. Now, my question to you is this. If the party that's in power utilized irregularities to go into power, what makes us think that they would want to change right now? What makes us think that they would want to speak up for the people? This is a question that we all need to ask ourselves. So again, if you like this video, please like and share so it gets to more people, so that people understand the critical role of civil society organizations in our democracy. Because civil society organizations have their skin in the game. They represent citizens in our Nigerian society. So they need all our support, and they need all of our voices in order to speak up for the rights of the Nigerian people. Thank you. He talks about okay, that's a blooper. So Clement Nwankwo talks about the okay.